Our last presenter is Matt Wagner, fish and wildlife biologist with Ecological Services Division of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, with expertise in endangered and threatened species, status assessments, listing, and recovery. Thank you, Matt.
Yay. Hi, everyone. I know we've gone a little over. My predecessors are all long-winded, and I don't blame them for that. They have a lot to say about a lot of cool stuff they've done over all the years. I don't know if any of you know my history. Some people that work here do. I used to be the ichthyologist at the museum before Robbie took my job and I went to the feds. I've been very involved with small-bodied non-game fish through most of my career. A lot of that means it's a lot of time wearing waders outside or pulling a net in 5 to 10 feet of water, depending on how your swimming ability is. Thankfully, when Robbie's on the other end of the seine, it's great because he's a collegiate swimmer and he can really swim the net even though he can't touch the bottom. I'm waiting for Donald to get my slide off, and honestly, I'm stalling for a second. That's okay. I do work for the Fish and Wildlife Service. My specialty is fish and mussels. When I came to the state of Mississippi, I had an undergraduate student ask me a question. And it was one of the very first tours I did while walking backwards in the museum, which now I can do without looking where I'm going unless Robbie moves stuff. But they asked me, how do you decide on what surveys you're going to do? And first year as a state non-game fish person, I just looked at them and a little bit dumbfounded for a second, and it's the surveys I want to do. But what drives that? One of the main things that drives our state surveys and our federal surveys, I actually don't know where the clicker is. There we go. Is when somebody sues the Fish and Wildlife Service or petitions us to list a species under the Endangered Species Act. That action triggers our state partners many times to then go and do surveys to see, if they don't already have data because they've been doing monitoring, how those species are doing. We want to list a species under the Endangered Species Act and give it protections when it's needed. We want to make sure we have good data from throughout the range of that species to actually make that listing decision. We don't always have that data. There's a lot of maps you have and they're very blank, and sometimes we don't have time or the effort or funding to go and do these widespread drainage-wide surveys of, for instance, mussels of the entire Pearl River, mussels of the Big Black River, fish communities of the Pascagoula River, different big surveys that honestly take a decent amount of time and a decent crew and a jet boat a lot of the times, which can glide over beautiful 2-inch deep riffles that Mike's crew can't get over. And for those of you who have not been to the mouth of the Strong, at low water, it is like 2 inches deep, and then there is a hole deeper than 50 feet sometimes because I was trawling and couldn't get my trawl to the bottom. Basically, I was pulling a net on the bottom of the river, I'll show a picture later, and it just kind of like hung in the water. I couldn't get to the bottom. So what I'm going to tell you guys about are 2 species that I worked with. One I don't work with so much anymore, but I still do very actively work with the pearl darter. The other one is freckle-belly mad tom. Okay, where are we pointing for this? Hitting the right button. It's the right arrow, right, Mike?
I think so.
Nope.
That's where I said.
Work for everyone else.
There we go. Okay. I work with a couple different species, the Fish and Wildlife Service. One of them is bayou darter, endemic to Bayou Pier, not relevant to the pearl today. Pearl darter, which I'll talk a little bit more about. Yakavatafa darter and yazoo darter, some ones in North Mississippi, and piebald mad tom, which has been petitioned and we're working on a listing decision on. So that student asked me that question, how do you figure out what you need to survey for? If I wasn't petitioned, or if I didn't have a petitioned species or know what we were going to go look for, my first question is, what data do we have? I asked this question back in 2015 when I started with the state, and we had a fish distribution database built for the inland fishes of Mississippi. And Todd Slack spent a lot of time checking IDs and putting records and curating fish for this. So did all the other ichthyologists and curators at museums nationwide. And when Dr. Stephen Ross made this book, we had 92,000 records of fish from throughout the state of Mississippi. That's a lot of dots on maps. A dot's a place somebody went and did a collection. Could have 10 species, could have 1 species. Since then, we've added a lot of data. And green in this is the newer stuff. This only is a map up to 2022, but we update this annually now. And this has data from a lot of different sources. but we have over double the records that were used in the Fishes of Mississippi book, which gives us a good frame of reference for how things were doing historically. So what's in these records? Sometimes we have a lot of data, sometimes we have the most basic information, which is the most basic thing we need. What was the species was it? Where was it? Ideally coordinates I can put in Google Maps. A date, at least a year, so I can go back through time, and a count, how many were caught. So with that data, we can really go through and say, okay, we know we saw at least 200 walleye in the Pearl, the spillway in the 1950s. We now see none. You now have a historical frame of reference and a current frame of reference. How do we use all this data? We assess the status of species through time. That time factor is really important because it really allows us to tell a story and see if things are in decline or actually recovering. So what's that application? Ooh, missed the slide. Yeah, go back. These are some of those petitions the Fish and Wildlife Service has received recently. This is called the Mega Petition. Center for Biological Diversity basically petitioned 404 aquatic species all at once. They're not allowed to do that anymore because we don't have the capacity to handle mass petitions. They have to individually petition species. The other one is I think this one was from 94. I can look that up. It's in one of my later slides. They petitioned just a smaller group of fish. And in this, we have the pearl darter. And in this mega petition, we had the freckle-bellied madtop. So when I started at the museum in 2015, these were both species under review by the federal government to figure out should they be listed or not. Freckle-bellied madtop. These are adorable. This is one of the federal biologist's hands. She's not here today, but that's her finger with a little baby. This is one of the photos Robbie showed earlier of a larger adult. They really don't get much bigger than this. They are venomous. Their spine looks like this. These are the little pectoral spines coming off the sides. They also have one on their back, not quite as serrated, but there's little venom cells all over these little serrations. It is your fault if you get envenomated. They don't sting you like a bee. Basically, you get cut by the spine, the cells rupture, and it stings like a hornet sting. I've never seen somebody be hospitalized. I've been stung over 200 times. I did a full survey for them. It is not fun. You scream, you throw your hand in ice water, grumble for a second, you move on. Then you probably get stung 5 minutes later. They only live about 3 years. That's a pretty short lifespan compared to Mike's Gulf sturgeon, which are living a very long time. They're benthic gravel shoal habitat specialists. They like beautiful gravel. This is out of the water. This is not underwater. But they like clean gravel, sometimes a little bit of larger substrate, larger cobble or bits of woody debris. And their diet mainly consists of aquatic insects that are silt intolerant. So you find a lot of mayflies, caddisflies, other things that live in good, clean gravel. This is a photo from Sarah Dabney's property on the Strong River. This is an Olympus stylus tough, whatever, the easy to buy $200 underwater camera. These things are super well camouflaged. They have a really cool banding pattern going from brown to light to brown to light, and they just hang out in the gravel. If you know where to look when you're snorkeling, not that many people snorkel in the Pearl or its tributaries, you can just see these when you're crawling around. But they really like clean gravel. You'll see there's not a lot of silt, there is sand. We've got large pieces of gravel and sand in here. The story of the freckle-belly. So we know it was petitioned. It had a decently large range. We got this weird population up in the Conasauga in Georgia, the Etowah. We have some in the Cahaba, Tom Bigby, and the Pearl. Yes, that's a really weird disjunct range. I don't have time to explain why its range is weird like it is. But the Pearl River population is what I'm going to talk about today. So here's my map, which I couldn't update because I couldn't find the file for both states. But as James was talking about, we have these different geologic layers. This is all of the known freckle-bellied madtop localities from the Pearl River. You see they're all throughout the main stem Pearl and a little bit up into a bunch of the Tribs, and in the Bogachita, and in the Strong. They're not north of the Strong. I've had many conversations with James Starnes about this. I don't know if you remember him in the very beginning of today talking about the terraces that have gravel in them. This is a gravel specialist. If our tributaries up here don't have gravel in them, there will not be source gravel in the main stem river. If you go a little bit above the mouth of the Strong up near Hopewell, there still is some gravel. We did sample there. We didn't find any. I'm going to go into all of our sampling in a minute. But these really are a gravel specialist. And that gravel has to be present in the tributaries as well as the main stem Pearl. So why was it petitioned? Well, this is its range in the Tom Bigby, Mississippi, and the Pearl in Louisiana and Mississippi. Come on. Okay. Makes sense if you're familiar with the 10-tom. Basically, the main stem tom Bigby is now a giant channel. There's not gravel shoals in there anymore. It's still in the tribs, though. But in the pearl, which we'll zoom in on the lower pearl, or lower half of the pearl, there was a 1999 survey. They found it at 8 of 53 places they surveyed. That's a really low number. Not only that, but they only collected 13 individuals. Wow, I have a year, I have at least locations, and I have counts. My basic distribution data for a species. The weird thing about this survey was they didn't find a single individual in the main stem Pearl River, only in tributaries. Now, mind you, things happen in the main stem that might not affect the tribs. If you have a spill of sorts, things typically flow downstream and not upstream, so tribs can act like refugia for species. This is pretty old data when you're at 2015, so we went out and we did a full pearl survey for freckled-bellied madtom. At every site, we wore waders in 100-degree weather and dumped out a gallon of sweat every day, but I carried the backpack shocker, we had a person on either side of the net, and then we had people kicking and electrofishing. The electrofishing stuns the fish, they then flow in these gravel areas, it flows downstream, because there's enough flow, the fish will end up in the net. Come on. There we go. We found it at 44 of 52 sites across the entire pearl. That's a lot. We found them at 16 sites in the main stem pearl. I caught up to 157 at one site. That's a lot of freckled-bellied madtoms. We collected 1,228 versus the 13 collected in 1999. That's a really big difference when something's being petitioned, when they historically thought there were barely any left in the pearl, versus there's actually a ton of them and they're in a lot of different places. Sarah's house should be right about there, and that is one of the best places on the Strong River. And one of the reasons for that is there is that hard, stable substrate, and we actually sample with Sarah, with the Garden Club, and other partners. We've now been sampling since 2015 at Sarah's property, and it's still one of the best places for freckled-bellied madtom throughout the entire Pearl River system. And it's not just a good place because we get high numbers, but we also get different size classes, and I'll get back to that in a second. Come on. Go the wrong way? Boop, boop. Next slide. Here's just a bunch of pretty pictures. Some of these tributaries are absolutely beautiful. I know not everybody gets out and gets to drive around and walk up beautiful tribs. You can see the gravel. It's actually pretty clear water. You can snorkel here. But in the tributaries, we have fairly large adult freckled-bellied madtoms. I need to... And main stem pearl, they're a bit smaller. This is something I noticed as we were measuring 1,200 freckled-bellied madtoms and putting together all of my different stuff. And it's a unique thing to freckled-bellies. Also, we didn't just work in Mississippi. Matt Duplessis with LDWF and his crew actually did the Louisiana portion. So we made sure to have an entire picture of the pearl. This is us out with them on the lower pearl, where we did catch them. I'm trying. A bunch of juveniles. Yet again, these are fairly small freckled-bellied madtoms. These things get to about 3 inches. I'm trying my hardest. Oops. Is this going to play? So this is Sarah's property. I think this was the 2017 collection we did, where they went and barely caught any. This is over 100 of them at one site. Adults, juveniles, but there's a healthy, and this is just one shoal that we sampled. There's other shoals throughout the Strong just like this. So, one of the cool little ecological things we noted about freckled-bellies, I divided these by stream order. So, picture first order streams are streams you can jump across, little itty bitty things. Second order, it's getting a bit wider. 2 first order streams come together. Third order streams, Strong River, Bogachito, main stem pearl. Will my slides work? What we had, nope. There's a magical, there it is. I'm not going to move my hand from here. Okay, what you have is in these first and second order streams, we saw all adults. What we had in the Strong River, which is that third one down, is a mix of adults and juveniles. In the main stem pearl, we caught mostly juveniles. There's a few blips beyond that 50 millimeter mark, but it's like 7, and my scale is, I don't know, we had 948 from the pearl, and I had like 12 adults. Meaning the pearl is acting as some type of nursery or refugia for this species, which has larval drift. So they're spawning in tributaries and potentially drifting to the pearl, becoming adults, and then migrating back into the tribs. How that works with only finding 13 in 1999, I don't know, but it keeps them from being extirpated from a place. They can recharge the main stem river from the tributary populations. So what's the application of all this data? Well, we got petitioned, we got all the data. Fish and Wildlife Service wrote a species status assessment, and they did not list the pearl river population because they didn't need it. 1,200 individuals is way different than 13. They did end up listing, I don't want to move my laser pointer, the purple population as a distinct population segment up in Alabama and Georgia because it is distinct genetically and was actually at risk. So our surveys really do affect listing decisions and protections. And not everything always needs protected. And I don't say that lightly, but not everything needs protected by the Endangered Species Act. Now, too far. Oh, I lost my magical spot. Pearl darter. Beautiful little fish. Robbie calls them French fries with spots on them. Okay. Small freshwater perch. They have a reduced swim bladder, so they're not really swimming up in the water column. They're literally darting around on the bottom. 3-year lifespan. Yet again, really short-lived. That means it has a high recovery potential because they have a short life cycle, but they can also get wiped out pretty easy. This one eats aquatic invertebrates. I don't just say insects because I was curious enough to make sure they weren't a specialist, if they were eating micro snails. So I gutted a bunch of them and found out, no, they actually ate a variety of different foods. They're not named for the Pearl River. People get this wrong all the time. If you want to go read the 1960s description, they're named for the pearly pastel blue iridescence, I'm going to move my thing, found right on their opercle here. And these guys spawn on gravel, at least we think they do. It's too muddy, as Mike showed in his slide about making them missing. Nobody's ever seen them spawning. Nobody likely ever will see them spawning in the wild. Potentially at a hatchery we could see that though. That's a little opalescent area. Oh, come on. Alright, so this was on that other petition. Why was it petitioned? Well, let's look at the distribution through time. Oh, come on. Okay, 1933. We had one caught in the past. I'm not going year by year. Don't worry, this will be decadal. Okay, too far. Too far. Back. Back one more. Come on. Okay, 1944 to 53. We had some records on the pearl. Royal D. Sutkiss out of Tulane comes along. This guy's a well-renowned ichthyologist, collects many sites throughout the Pearl River, including Sarah Dabney's property on the Strong. Goes there regularly, almost annually. So we see this is really widespread throughout the Strong River, all the way down to Lower Pearl. In this same period, we have a bunch of the dams. A lot of the people with the earlier presentations have showed where they all went in. But notice, we'd have no records upstream of the Strong, and that's based on that geology. There's not really gravel there. The species doesn't really go towards it. Come on. Suspense for the clicking is killing me.
Try dance.
There we go. Okay. 64 to 73. We still see them throughout the Pearl and up in the Bogachito. Mind you, we have these sills in here, though. Then as soon as we hit 74, we never see them in the Pearl again. At least for a long time, for good reason. After that, we still see them throughout the Pascagoula. Widespread throughout the Pascagoula. A lot of this is due to surveys from people in this room. And then before the petition happened, I wanted to go out and look using a gear most people don't like to use. This is a benthic trawl. You literally drag this through the river. There's two what are called otter boards here. There are big heavy metal things that keep it on the bottom. There's a chain and an open net. So an ichthyologist is literally, we can't go deeper than usually about 5.5 feet because we average about 5'9" to 5'11". So this can go in 20 feet of water. This can go in 3 feet of water. It's pulled by the boat. So we trawled for 17 days on the Pearl River. We also had Southeastern Louisiana State University do some eDNA, just trying to see if they could detect them anywhere. Lo and behold, nobody found any pearl darter. Not a surprise, but at least we put one last ditch effort in to make sure they're not there before the petition happened. before the listing decision happened. So, May 2004, sorry, I couldn't remember the year, petitioned, finally proposed, threatened in September 2016. The service had a large backlog of stuff and was understaffed, and then it got listed as threatened in 2017. Well, we acted quick. We were actually working really well with Private John Allen National Fish Hatchery. They propagate some other fish for us. And the guys there said, hey, we're willing to try and propagate them if you can get us brood stock. So we went out to the Pascagoula River, actually right below the gravel pits Mike was talking about. There's a nice little shoal or two there. We collected some adult pearl darters, brought them to the hatchery, and they held them over winter. And we did this according to the service propagation policy, which is my nice little thing in the corner. In the spring, they put them out in these raceways. They put gravel, sand, logs, a little bit of vegetation. We don't know what they spawn on, so we gave them all the options we could. Come on. And they spawned. Hey, we can make pearl darters. The problem we have is we've made them, but we usually can't make a lot. We might get 15 adults and maybe get around 40 to 50 juveniles out of that, which we need a lot more to establish a founder population in the strong. So they were petitioned, proposed, threatened, listed. Then to do all this stuff and actually put them in the water, we have some documents at the Fish and Wildlife Service we need. One is a recovery outline that just outlines what we're going to do for recovery for the species, where we talk to our partners and make sure we're all on the same page. Two is a species status assessment. We have to actually go through and say, how is the species doing throughout the rest of its range? How can you guide your recovery criteria to think, what is a recovered state if you don't have an assessment of the species throughout its entire range? Okay, how is it doing in the Pascagoula? And what would it take to put it back in the pearl and make it no longer need protection under the Endangered Species Act? We then write a recovery plan and an actual implementation strategy. And then before we actually put them in the river, we need a captive propagation plan. If I have 50,000 pearl darters that I got from 2 adults, that will never happen. I'm not going to put 50,000 in on Sarah's property because we're going to put too many fish in the river. You need to have contingencies for what's going to happen with those that spawn and how you're going to monitor that propagation and reintroduction. Just to let you all know, these are a lot of documents. I'm not, for time's sake, going to go over all these, but it ends up, I think, being, it's a few hundred pages. This is the not fun part Paul Hartfield didn't tell me about before I became fed. All right, so our last map was 2014 to 2023, and we now have a black dot back on the map. We've stocked for 2 years. We have a private hatchery in Tennessee propagating these, as well as a hatchery in Tupelo. I have hope for the pearl. Yes, there's a lot of issues. Abby's group has done some, and shows there's issues in the strong. There's issues with water quality. There's issues with water quality throughout. But one of the things that happens to rivers through time is they actually do start to recover. There are stable shoals throughout the pearl. There are stable shoals throughout the strong. And we have other sensitive species like freckle-belly mad tom that are actually doing really well. Another benthic aquatic invert specialist that's doing great. Matt Roberts, my predecessor at the museum, and I found crystal darters at Sarah Dabby's. Robbie had a picture of them. They're a very large darter. They've never been documented there before. Now that might be because the river's widened and broadened and the currents have changed enough that it's more occupiable habitat by them, but I have hope that at least our introductions in the strong, if we keep doing them enough years, pearl darters will eventually reproduce. Now, the big question is if they reproduce in the strong, where they were known from, and the larvae float down, will this be an issue down here? We've done some work at the hatchery. We know how many days they float for. After looking at some different flow data, I don't think the larvae are going to end up all the way down here, but they were knocked out of the pearl once. They could potentially be knocked out again. We don't know what happened. I've talked to Sarah. I've talked to other people. My best guess is it was literally pre-Clean Water Act. There was a single point source event or something that happened in the strong, and it wiped them out all the way down here. And the few that we had in the Bogachito couldn't deal with the sill in the Bogachito. It's hard to wipe something out of a drainage unless you start at the headwaters because there's still more fish above it. Like our freckle bellies, they can stay in the tributaries even if they're extricated from the main stem and then re-inhabit it. So my guess is whatever happened to knock these out is probably in the strong. Am I afraid of chicken farming still overflow into the strong river more than anything else ecologically? Yes. But I have hope that this is going to work out. We've been documenting a ton of species at Sarah's property. Right at Highway 28 right here is where we're putting the pearl darters. We have buy-in from our federal and state partners, as well as our private partners. The Garden Club goes and does a survey with us every year. And after about 3 or 4 years of introducing these, we're We're actually going to go do at least a very thorough survey, probably a little bit above, all the way throughout the strong, into the main stem pearl. Are we seeing them? I will end with hopefully this YouTube video, and that will be the last thing I show, so we'll see if Donald can pull it up or not. I don't think I can click. I'm not going to even try with it. You're gonna
kind of look like a catfish.
They are tiny catfish.
They are cat-
Yeah.
catfish.
Oh, funny story. We'll have a second to see if you can pull it up. That cup was sitting there for a beautiful picture, and the dog ran down and knocked the cup over and introduced the darter into the river. It was hilarious. Was that the last one or the first one? Was that the last one?
That was the last
It was the last one, yeah.